Hello and welcome to my new channel. My name is Rich. There's absolutely no reason why you'd know or care who I am at this point, unless you already follow me maybe in an entirely different industry, because I do some content in a different sphere. But anyway, without further ado, this is my UFC 305 breakdown. So let's get right into it, starting with Stewart Nicoll versus Jesus Aguilar. Now, I knew nothing about Steve Nicoll until earlier today, actually. His last 4 fights were for a company called Beatdown Promotions. So yeah, I did check out his latest fight, and he shot for a takedown 15 seconds in. Make of that what you will. He does get a lot of finishes though, so you know, at least he's not just sitting on you. But yeah, it does seem to be a guy who likes a wrestle/grapple heavy style. But anyway, I'm going to pick Jesus Aguilar to win this fight by KO or TKO. He's also pretty comfortable grappling and on the ground. He's actually won multiple fights on a UFC level, which always helps. So whenever there's a new guy who I don't really know anything about, and I'm not sort of blown away by watching his fights in previous promotions, I'm generally going to go with the UFC veteran on this one. Also, fun fact, he's won 4 of his last 9 wins by guillotine. Jesus, that is. So don't be surprised to see some sort of Dustin Poirier volume of guillotine attempts in this one. But yeah, more importantly, he also just looked like more of a natural on his feet to me than from what I've seen of Nicoll. As I said, I did go through his last fight. I watched the whole of his last fight, but I also saw bits and pieces from his previous fights, and he just doesn't look that good to me. He is undefeated, so who knows? Like, a lot of fighters will fight to the level of their opponent, so you know, maybe fighting in the UFC is going to inspire him to reach a new and greater level. But I'm going with Aguilar for this one by TKO or KO. Right, let's move on to Kenan versus Ricky Glenn. You probably remember Ricky Glenn from his draw against Grant Dawson, but since then he's had a pretty rough time of it. He had a really bad groin injury, I believe it was, that took him out for almost like 2 years. Maybe it was longer than 2 years. He's also now coming off 2 losses, and he's 35. So it's a bit rough. He's also moving up to welterweight for this fight. He was actually a featherweight champion in another promotion at one point in time, which is kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, he is now going to be fighting at welterweight, which I guess isn't actually uncommon. I mean, we've seen Conor and a few others sort of bridge multiple weight divisions. Obviously, Alex most recently. But yeah. Also, yeah, he's 6 feet tall, or he's listed at 6 feet tall. So actually, sort of holistically, this would seem more like his natural weight class, I guess. He must have been pretty bloody depleted to be fighting at featherweight at 6 foot. Jesus Christ. Okay. Well, anyway, yeah. But Kenan, he's also getting up there in age. He's 34. He's also coming off a loss. But if people remember, if you did see this fight, he was pretty close to finishing Ian the Cut Gary when they fought a couple of fights ago. Caught him with a check left hook as he was coming in, pounded him against the cage, sort of Sean Strickland versus Izzy vibes. But if I'm being honest, he did get dominated for the vast majority of that fight. That was sort of his one moment. A lot of people would sort of call that a fluky punch or whatever. And yeah, as I said, on the feet, he did get dominated by Gary from that moment onwards. So yeah, this one's actually kind of hard for me to pick, I think. But because of the layoff, because of the injuries, yeah, I think it's just too much to expect Ricky Glenn to do anything, especially moving up in weight at 35. I mean, that makes sense, I guess. Like, you probably should move up in weight at that point. As I said here, he's like listed at 6 feet as well, so it's not like he's going to be tiny for the weight class or anything like that. But he does also look slow to me and a bit flat-footed. Like, if you go back and watch his featherweight fights, even then, like, one of the advantages of being a featherweight, obviously, is the sort of the speed and the superior footwork and movement. He never looked like that to me. He never looked like having that skill set in abundance. I think he lacks explosion, and he's older now. You know, maybe the lighter man skill takes it, but I'm not sure how much lighter man skill there even ever was in old Ricky Glenn. So who knows? But yeah, I'm going to go for Song Kenan. Right, moving on to Tom Nolan versus... Oh, I did not mean to click that. Tom Nolan versus Alex Reyes. Why is this... Okay, there we go. This is the easiest fight of the night to call, in my opinion. Tom Nolan is going to brutally finish Alex Reyes any way he wants. Reyes is 37. He hasn't fought in forever. I think his last fight was actually in 2000. No, he's fought once since 2017 when he got knocked out by Mike Perry. And when he did fight again, he got KO'd in his comeback fight by Charlie Campbell last year. So, yeah, Tom Nolan, young, hungry, actually finishes fights. Guy hasn't gone to a decision since like his first 2 fights ever in MMA, I think. So, there's not too much to say on this one. Nolan by first round KO is my prediction there. Right. Jack Jenkins versus Herbert Burns. Again, to me, another easy one to pick. Jack Jenkins was on a heater before he lost his last fight to a pretty fluke injury. Basically, he got hip tossed, and when he was falling to the ground, he trapped his arm in like a nasty position, like a nasty angle, and it took all of his weight, and it just completely screwed his arm. So yeah, there's always a question mark of how ready, how injury-free is he actually, but assuming he's in good shape, which I feel like you have to do with these predictions, unless you hear otherwise, I think he's finishing this fight against Burns. Burns is 36, lost his last 3 fights, all by TKO. He's also been struggling to make weight in a couple of his previous fights, and, 36 years old in the featherweight division, that's a rough one. So yeah, I'm going Jack Jenkins by TKO. Jack's got some really good crisp boxing technique. Mixes it up a lot, goes body head, like really good variety in his punches. I think he's actually one of the more skilled guys in the division. And he has a really nice 1-2 down the pipe that you're going to see a lot of. That's kind of like his bread and butter. But yeah, just a super efficient striker, really good technique, good power. I actually really rate Jack Jenkins. So yeah, I'm going to go Jack Jenkins here by either KO or TKO. Right, moving on to Casey O'Neill versus Luana Santos. Casey O'Neill... I'm going Luana, Santos by submission. If you know, you know. That's all I'll say on that one. Right, let's go to Joshua Culibao versus Ricardo Ramos. Culibao, he's coming off 2 losses, albeit one was a pretty close split decision against Danny Silva, I think. And Danny Silva actually missed weight in that fight, so... I think they might even have fought it at catch weight at the time. But he obviously would have rehydrated to a more, more human weight. Whereas Culibao, I think would have been a big disadvantage in that fight, and he fought to a split decision. So I don't read too much into that loss necessarily. Obviously, he's fighting Ricardo Ramos, who's also coming off 2 losses. Oddly, back-to-back guillotine chokes, which are meant to be becoming more rare in MMA. That's what they tell us, that the guillotine is not, a super advanced technique. It's relatively easy to get out of or whatever if it's not completely cinched. So to get back-to-back guillotined is a bit odd. But yeah. Anyway, he lost recently to wily old vet Julian Erosa, which... Again, make of that what you will. I think both guys here have good BJJ, but I think Ramos actually has the edge here. I do think on the feet, Culibao has the more fluid striking. He's got the better fundamentals, but Ramos is much more exciting on the feet. He throws a lot of spinning techniques. If you've watched any of his recent fights, this guy loves back fists, back elbows, wheel kicks, heel kicks. the whole 9 yard, jumping knees as well. He does lack fundamentals. His guard isn't great. He's pretty hittable, and he doesn't check leg kicks well, generally at least. So I am a bit worried about that. I believe that Culibao is the favorite. And I assume it's kind of based on how hittable Ramos is, because as I said, I think if it goes to the ground, Ramos does have the advantage there, and Culibao does have better fundamentals. Having said that, I am actually going for the betting underdog on this one, and I'm going to go with Ramos. I think he's more unpredictable on the feet. And yeah, I probably do give the standing edge to Josh, but I can definitely see this one going to the ground. And I do think Ramos has a big advantage there in the jiu-jitsu. He's a legit black belt in jiu-jitsu, whereas Culibao is a purple belt and I think less comfortable. And anything, to be honest as well, MMA is one of those things where it's like anything less than like a black belt from a reputable distributor of black belts, and I don't particularly take other sort of browns, purples, whatever, that seriously, generally speaking. You can always be surprised, but based on what I've seen of both of them, I do think Ramos has a significant advantage on the ground. So yeah, I'm going to go with Ricardo Ramos by decision, I think. Right, let's move on to Junior Tafa versus Valter Walker. This is the featured prelim. Yeah, Valter Walker, who, by the way, is Johnny Walker's brother, just lost to Lucas the Bull Brzeski in his UFC debut, which, I'm not going to lie, that's not a great sign. Lucas was on a 3-fight losing streak right before that fight, and he's just been KO'd by Mick Parkin in round 1. So, yeah, that's a little bit ominous, I would say. Valter is pretty slow and ploddy on the feet. Your typical UFC heavyweight outside of the top 5 at this point. Honestly, from what I've seen of the guy, he looks horrendous. He's been fighting in some super low-level Russian promotion. And I think he's only in the UFC, honestly, because his brother is Johnny Walker. That might be a bit cynical. Maybe that's unfair, but that is definitely how it feels to me. So yeah, even though I think Junior Tafa is also pretty slow and ploddy, there's a touch of the Mark Hunt about Junior Tafa, you know? He does have that overhand, which can turn the lights off, and his hands are generally just slicker than Walker. So yeah, unfortunately though, I do think the most likely scenario here is a decision. Valter does like to smother guys against the cage and hang on them, so unless Tafa gets him out there early, I can easily just see both guys getting really tired and after round 1 just sort of flopping around on top of each other. So yeah, but either way, I see Tafa landing the more damaging shots in the exchanges, so I'm picking him to win by decision. Right. Jingliang versus Carlos Prates. I'm going with Carlos Prates by knockout. Bro's on an 11-fight win streak, 3 in the UFC, 9 knockouts in a row. He's got nasty Muay Thai. He's got really good calf kicks, nasty knees, constantly throws teeps up the middle to control distance, but also, actually, when he throws his teeps, it's not like a Sean Strickland teep where he's just doing it to sort of keep the guy at bay or like purely manage the distance. He throws it like an up kick, like he's going to throw it up to your chin, like a sort of a Machida or an Anderson Silva style technique where he's sort of extending at the end where he can hit you on the ball of the toes or the heel, depending on how he throws it. And it's like a more aggressive kick. So it's not that pure sort of just touching you and keeping you back like a Sean Strickland. It's actually like a pretty vicious technique. He's not lightning fast, but he does throw really crisp straights down the middle. He's just a really solid striker, and he's also got decent takedown defense, which always helps when obviously you're wanting to keep it on the feet. I think Lee is going to want to take this to the ground. Lee's fine on his feet, but he's a bit wild and loopy. Definitely not as refined or technical a striker as Prates on the feet. Lee is some really good ground and pound. So, yeah, again, I think that will be his objective. He's going to want to... He's probably going to start standing because, you know, well, the fight starts standing, right? He's probably going to test himself a little bit on the feet. But then I think after he's realized that he can't really stand and scrap with this guy, if it gets a bit tetchy for him, I think you'll see him start trying to make it dirty and get Prates up against the fence and drag him down to the ground and try and pound him out. That would be his sort of win condition, if you like. However, yeah, that's easier said than done. And every fight, every round starts standing. So I think Carlos Prates is going to land that crisp 1-2 at some point down the pipe. And I think he's going to win this one by knockout. Right. Tai Tuivasa versus Rozenstruik. Tai Tuivasa has been finished, not just lost, he's been finished in his last 4 fights. Yeah, it's looking rough out here for the Nelk boy simp. I think Rozenstruik has just way better striking. He's also got like that rare gift of keeping his power even when he's moving backwards. So when Tai does get his moments when he'll sort of plod forward looking for those sort of aggressive combinations, I think Rozenstruik's just as dangerous going backwards as he is forwards. Tai does actually have some decent leg kicks, but I just think Rozenstruik is a legit kickboxer with better leg kicks. I think he wins in basically every facet on the feet. I also don't think any fighter here, is interested in taking this one to the ground. And yeah, Rozenstruik has knockout wins against guys like Overeem and Dos Santos, who are way better than Tai Tuivasa. So yeah, I mean, sure, by the way, both of those guys are obviously past their prime, but you know, there are levels to this. I think this will be a standing fight, and I just think this massively favors Rozenstruik. But look, Tai has great heart, okay? He does have great heart. He's got that Maui sort of, you know, salt of the earth, farmer strength, inner strength, if you like. But yeah, he does tend to just stay in there and swing, even when he's outclassed. And yeah, it makes for exciting fights. He had a good fight against Garn, right? It was exciting, but realistically, he was never going to win. And I think it's kind of the same here, even though Garn's probably a little bit of a better striker than Rozenstruik. Rozenstruik's still a legit kickboxer. So yeah, I'm going to go for Rozenstruik by KO. But I'm going to say he gets it done in round 2. Because I do think Tai has heart, and he can tank a lot of damage. He's like a fucking video game character, the way he's built. He's just sort of, you know, not really going to threaten you too much. He's just going to plod around a bit. You know, he's going to get some damage off at some point, sure, but he's there to be hit, basically, and his super long health bar is just going to go until he's donezo. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to be loss number 5 in a row for Tai Tuivasa, which, by the way, is insane to me that you can actually be on a 4-loss streak and still be ranked in the top 10. Which is what he currently is. He's ranked number 10 in the heavyweight division, which is crazy. Just sort of sums up the heavyweight division at the moment. Basically, everyone outside of like the top 4 guys is absolutely cooked. So, yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, Rozenstruik by knockout in round 2. Right. Let's go to Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker. I am really looking forward to this fight. Even though I think most likely it's going to be pretty one-sided. But Dan Hooker does have that striker's chance against anyone. He's got knockout power in both hands, deadly knees. But, yeah, I mean, he's also pretty easy to hit, right? He's another guy who likes to stand and bang. He's not probably going to mix in any sort of takedowns or anything like that. I don't think it would even be in his interest. I think that actually his best chance is if it's standing and he clips Gamrot with something. So yeah, I think for the most part he'll be standing in front of Gamrot as a bit of a punching bag, if I'm honest. He'll for sure get some licks in, but I just think Gamrot is the much more technical striker, and I think he'll more than cope with Hooker on the feet. Gamrot also, as we know, has pretty high level scrambling wrestling, counter wrestling. I mean, he basically neutralized Arman's wrestling entirely. I mean, Arman sort of neutralized his wrestling as well, but he's a great wrestler. So, Dan Hooker is not Arman. So, yeah, I think that basically if Gamrot wants, like if it ever does get difficult on the feet, he can just go to his wrestling and take Dan Hooker down at ease. So, yeah, I think the biggest problem for Dan in this fight is if Dan does start to tee off at Gamrot at any point, I just don't see Gamrot having any issue with just taking him down at will. And I also don't see Dan getting up unless Gamrot allows him to get up. So, yeah, look, can Dan Hooker win this fight? Yes, absolutely he can. He's got a solid striker's chance. I just don't see his more wild techniques, let's say, landing on a guy as tidy as Gamrot as frequently as they would need to for him to win this fight. So yeah, I am going to pick Gamrot to win this in round 1 or 2, most likely by probably like TKO ground and pound. I think that's the most likely scenario. I will say though, for as long as the fight lasts, I expect it to be pretty exciting, as with most of Dan Hooker's fights, unless Gamrot just immediately shoots on him, of course, and it's like, screw this, I'm just gonna take him down and win, and I don't give a what about the crowd. So yeah, I think Gamrot fairly comfortably wins this one. Right, Kai Kara-France versus Sid from Ice Age, aka Steve Erceg. I'm actually honestly surprised how close the betting line is for this fight. I would have Erceg here as a pretty massive favorite. I mean, what has Kai actually done in the UFC? Like, if you really break it down, what has Kai actually done? He's fought and lost against Brandon Moreno twice. He lost a very close fight to Albazi. Okay, sure. He's got wins over a washed Cody, Askar, who doesn't even fight in the UFC anymore. Although I think he had some weird health issue or something like that. I don't think he got cut. I can't remember. Got choked out by Brandon Royval. Like, I don't know. I just don't see it. Like, I must be missing something with this guy, but I don't know why his stock is so high. I don't know why he's like, why the odds on this one are as close as they are. Sid the Sloth, on the other hand, aka Steve Erceg, arguably beat Pantoja. A lot of people had him winning that fight. I didn't. I do think Pantoja won the way fights are currently scored in the UFC. But it was a razor-thin win. Like, that was a super close fight. He's also got 2 performance of the night's bonuses in his last 3 fights. One against Mark Schnell. I don't remember who the other one was, but I'm sure he had 2 mega performances in like his last couple of fights before the Pantoja fight. So yeah, I don't know. Both guys are like obviously decent grapplers. I maybe give the edge to Steve Erceg there. I just think also Erceg's length in the grappling might be a problem for Kai, who doesn't have as good a reach. Kai is decent on the feet, especially with his kicks. But again, I just think Erceg is one of the best technicians on the feet we've seen at flyweight. I think he's just better all round. I basically think it's one of these situations where he's just a better fighter and basically wherever the fight goes. Unfortunately, because it's flyweight, I'm not expecting a finish necessarily. If we do, it'll probably be like a nasty hook from Erceg, I would guess. But I think most likely this one goes to a decision. And yeah, I'm going Steve Erceg by decision. I don't get Kai Kara-France. I just don't get him at all. I don't get the hype. I don't get his stock. I don't get why the betting line's so close. It just does not make sense to me. But yeah, Steve Erceg. Right, let's move on to the main event. Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. Right, okay, before I break this down, I do have to get my bias out the way. I think that's important, which is I don't like Izzy. I do not like Israel Adesanya, okay? And I don't think I'm alone here. I actually think, hot take, or maybe it's not that hot, lukewarm take, I actually think Izzy might be the most disliked fighter in the UFC right now. I mean, obviously you have John, but I mean, you can't even really consider John as an active fighter right now, so I'd sort of put him to one side. And then who else? Like, you've got a lot of fans who don't like sort of those sort of Russian / Dagestani fighters because of their, you know, heavy wrestle style. But I don't think any of them individually are as disliked as Israel is at the moment. Maybe Hamzat, actually. Maybe Hamzat. But again, he's not really like a big enough name to be as hated as Izzy yet, right? So actually, I do think Izzy is probably the most hated. And yeah, I should probably explain why I don't like him. You know, there's obviously a myriad of reasons why you might not. Obviously, he's a great fighter. He can be good to watch, although he can also be awful to watch. But yeah, I do have a few reasons, which I'll probably just line out first. A big part of the reason why I personally don't like Izzy is, to me, he comes across as very petty and salty, sort of Jamal Hill vibes, I guess, sometimes, especially when it comes to his rivalry with Alex. His latest shtick seems to be saying that, like, well, he has said this in a couple of interviews recently, that he does like Alex, but he just doesn't like his fans. But, I mean, Izzy, my man, you literally said to Alex's face after he beat you in their first fight that you respect him, but you don't like him. So yeah, not sure what's going there. I think he knows it would be a very bad look for him if he straight up just said, like, I don't like Alex publicly, and he probably didn't realize at the time that the microphones picked up what he was saying to Alex. But yeah, he straight up said to Alex Pereira, I don't like you, but I respect you. And Alex just sort of stood there like, huh? Shama. Probably didn't have a fucking clue what he says. So yeah. I also think it's pretty ironic to hate on Alex's fan base when Izzy might have the most cringeworthy fan base in the entire UFC at this point. Like, to me, that is just pretty wild. And then obviously you've got all the sort of recent stuff of, like, you know, all this who is the real African nonsense, like, going back and forth, and he's like criticizing how privileged certain fighters are, and it's like, dude, you grew up in Nigeria with literal servants. Now, I have had this be explained to me that, you know, it's quite common for even not particularly wealthy people to have servants in Nigeria or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, fine, absolutely. But I just think optics-wise, even if that's true, you cannot call anyone privileged if you've had literal fucking servants. Regardless of the context, if you grew up with servants, just probably avoid calling people privileged. Maybe go to a different pool of insults for that. So yeah, I think that's, you know, obviously isn't a great look. I also don't like how corny he is. I don't like his little rehearsed one-liners, you know, sort of, I don't keep scores, I settle them kind of shit. Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't like his corny one-liners, as I said. Like, it's just it's all very cringeworthy to me. Also, just things like in the Anderson fight, like when he fought Anderson Silva, like he throws a head kick which Anderson ducks underneath. It's like a super cool, like smooth movie-esque moment, and then rather than him like letting that be Anderson's moment, he does this stupid little like sort of Neo from the Matrix in the dojo, like, come at me bro thing that he does to like Morpheus to Anderson after Anderson just like dodged his technique. And I was like, dude, why are you trying to make that moment about you? I just thought that was like super lame. And there's just loads of small things like this. Oh, and actually that reminds me as well, I also despise this narrative that people like Joe Rogan and others have pushed that Izzy's the greatest middleweight of all time. Like, dude, a 43-year-old Anderson had a good fight against Izzy. Like, what do you think Prime Anderson would do to him? Like, I find that so fucking egregious. Like, anyway, monologue over. Moving on to the fight itself. I could talk sort of all day about this matchup stylistically, but I just think that this fight is basically what it comes down to is, has Izzy learned how to deal with relentless pressure? All Strickland had to do against Izzy basically was just walk him down with his guard up. Like, a lot of the guys that Izzy has fought haven't kept up that sort of relentless pressure, at least not for 5 rounds. Yoel Romero comes to mind, Costa, these guys tend to fight in bursts. But when he has fought against people who do keep that pressure up, then he's struggled. Like Kelvin Gastelum as well, right? Like, who's a significantly easier fight than Dricus, made Izzy sweat. Like, my dude was stood in the corner between rounds saying, I am willing to die, or whatever it was that fucking Izzy said in the corner. And Dricus is basically Kelvin Gastelum, but like on steroids, right? I mean, just figuratively, of course, not literally, but you know, who knows? But yeah, I just think Dricus will constantly march forward with sustained pressure. We saw Dricus in the fight against Strickland that he actually has great cardio now. That was like always a criticism of him, like how good is his cardio? But ever since he got his nose fixed, it does seem like he can keep up that pace for 5 rounds. And doing that against Strickland, who's like the king of cardio, yeah, I think we've seen Izzy fade a bit when that's happened to him. So yeah, how well is Izzy going to deal with being walked down round after round? What adjustments has he made to deal with that during this camp? Now, having said all that, I do still think this fight is really hard to pick. Obviously, Izzy is the far more technical striker, and I do expect to see a better version of him than the guy who fought against Sean Strickland. But I'm not actually sure that will be enough, especially if Dricus tries to mix in the wrestling, which I think he'll be able to do. Dricus is huge for middleweight. This guy is so thick and dense. I don't know what this guy walks around at, but when he gets in the octagon, that guy is absolutely massive. So yeah, I don't know how well Izzy's going to deal with the wrestling. Then again, Izzy's fought wrestlers who haven't particularly wrestled him. Again, Romero, etc. Although Romero just chooses to not wrestle anyone for whatever reason. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a rough matchup for Izzy. I just think he just doesn't do too well with these style of fighters. But then again, every fight starts standing. Every round starts standing. Izzy has underrated knockout power. He also has an underrated chin. I don't think Dricus is going to knock him out. I mean, Izzy's only one true KO was Alex in kickboxing, right? Like, even in their MMA fight, when Alex knocked him out, it was a TKO. It was just sustained barrage of punches. Like, Izzy's chin's actually pretty good. So, yeah, I don't see Dricus necessarily knocking him out. But yeah, man, this is really hard to call, but I am going to go with DDP by decision. I think he probably just ends up outworking him and grinding down an older Izzy, right? Again, Izzy's older. He's not been super active recently. Yeah, I think Dricus makes it dirty, makes it messy, gets inside, works him, and probably mixes in some takedowns like here and there to steal rounds. I think that's like an issue as well for Izzy. It's like, because he's such a natural counter striker, when someone's applying forward pressure, even if you are picking them off, even if you are getting some good strikes in here and there, the wrestler can just steal rounds with takedowns late on, right? Depending on who the judges are. So I think that's going to be an issue. What I do hope for, no matter what, though, is that whoever wins, that it's conclusive. What I mean by that is, like, I'm a very strong believer that if a fight is razor close, you should give whatever the questionable round was to the champion and then issue like an immediate rematch, right? That might sound like a bit controversial, but I just think that a challenger should have to take the belt from the champion. I think if you basically fight someone to a draw, I find it odd and kind of hype killing if you then, like, if the belt moves, if that makes sense. I think that person has earned the right to have a rematch, but I don't think they've necessarily earned the right to be like a new champion, like a changing of the guard. I think that's too much for me. So yeah, I'm not saying, by the way, if it's like 3-2 in rounds, you should give it to the champion if they only won 2 rounds. If they clearly won 3 rounds, then that's absolutely fine. I just think if it's like razor thin and there's one questionable round where it really could have gone either way, then the champion should get the nod. But that's just my opinion. And yeah, like, for example, I mean, I thought Sean won the DDP fight. It was very, very close, but I actually think Sean won that fight. And either way, I don't think the belt should have been changing hands there. I just think in that scenario, it's just kind of BS that Sean loses the belt and then doesn't get a rematch, and then Izzy's now getting a shot off the back of a loss. Like, come on, man. I know it's a specific situation, but yeah, it would have been just so much better if they just had given the nod to Sean, had an immediate rematch, and then DDP either smashes him and conclusively wins a belt, or Sean makes the adjustments and whatever. Like, I would have much preferred that. Anyway, with that being said, I am going to go with the Dricus du Plessis by decision to retain his belt, and then presumably set up a rematch with Strickland. Although, again, this whole stuff with like Whitaker's going to fight Hamza. Maybe they give, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, the UFC might give them, the winner of that, a title shot. Who knows? Or even worse, make the winner of that fight Strickland. And yeah, who knows? Anyway, that'll be it. That is my breakdown for the fight, or the fights. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this breakdown, do please consider, I had like a brain aneurysm there for a second. Do please consider subscribing, as I will be putting out a lot more regular content going forwards on this channel. Thank you very much. Peace.